Hello everyone, this is CounterYolo bringing you another video in Star Trek Online. And today, after almost a year of waiting, we're finally going to be talking about the Prime Engle in terms of its stats and stuff inside the game. So let's go ahead and get into what we're going to be doing, which is, like normal, we'll do a basic overview of the stats, some Starship Comparisons with the few amount of ships that are available for striking escorts in the game, the Trade Console Experimental Weapon, the TLDW, and then just an FYI to y'all for what my plans for the rest of my videos in 2019 are going to be looking like. Feel free to see the timelines in the description to jump to those points if you don't want to watch the entire video, but this is going to be a relatively short video considering all of that. So when it comes to the C-Store version of this ship, because we have a C-Store and a Fleet version, the C-Store is a little bit weaker, but it does get a Starship Trading Console, so that is definitely nice there. Because the escorts, they're generally fast, a 0.19 impulse, which means they're faster than basically every cruiser in the game, with the exception of the Freedom Frigate, which you're probably never going to see in this game. These ships have 5 weapons in the front and 2 in the back, which is better than most of the Starfleet escorts in this game. And the unique thing for these ships is that they have a Lieutenant Commander Universal Command. Most of the other Starfleet escorts in the game have a Lieutenant Commander pilot, but we don't have any Starfleet escorts in the entire game with a Commander specialist seat. So it's not really that unexpected for a starship intended to be able to be earned from the fleet to necessarily, have or not have a Commander specialist seat. So there's that. Here's the endgame stats if you get the fleet version. Again, like normal for fleet, it's 5 fleet modules if you don't have the C-Store version, or if you do have the C-Store version, then it's just 1 fleet module to get it, alongside with having your free fleet requisitions and the tiered military required. The old Starship escorts from the fleet required tier 5 military. That was partly because back in the day, Cryptic didn't really have that much of an emphasis on carriers that they do now. They know that it's more profitable now, and I'll get more on that in a couple of weeks. But basically, Cryptic wants more players to have ships with hangar bays, so that players are more motivated to buy ships to get stronger hangar beds and such. So it's a fun little cycle that they have there. Keep in mind, with the extra console that you're getting with the fleet version, it's another science console, not another tactical, but another science. These ships are leaning into the theme that the Mirror Engle Starship escort, at that time it was called an escort carrier, but the Mirror Engle had an emphasis on science, and so do these ships as well. One of the things that annoys me a little bit is that they're calling the Klingon version also a Starship escort. Thematically in this game, if it's a Klingon ship and it has a cloak for the escort class, it's called a Raptor. So Cryptic, if you're watching this video, if you could change the title from escort to Raptor, that would be nice. And yes, there is the Lethean escort that exists inside the C-Store, but that ship doesn't have a cloak. It is the exact same stats and everything for the Federation version. So yes, that one's called an escort because it's actually an escort, not a Raptor. This one's a Raptor because it has a cloak, so it should be called a Raptor. Alright, cool. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the Starship Comparisons itself. Now, here are the 2 ships that the Engle's based off of. Obviously, we have the Mirror Engle, Strike-Wing Escort, released last year. And we also have the Tier 5 Strike-Wing Escort. Well, the Strike-Wing Escort available from Tier 5 military. Looking at the stats, that one's a bit more sturdy than these ones in terms of its hull, but a little bit lower shields. And because it's based upon the old paradigm for a lot of escorts in the game, it has the old 4 weapons in the front, 3 in the back instead of 5 weapons in the front and 2 in the back. That is kind of standard nowadays for newer ships. And it's got 3 lieutenant seats. Keep in mind though, the Klingon and the Romulan version of this starship actually has different bridge officer seating, which is cool, because that means now when we look at the other ships, you can ask yourself, okay, if I'm actually interested in a ship like this, what bridge officer seating do I really want? Do I really just want 3 lieutenants with my commander tactical lieutenant and lieutenant commander engineering pilot? Or would I be interested in, having a lieutenant commander, a second lieutenant commander in there too? And for those of you that don't like science, well, the Romulan version, which is available to both factions, has a lieutenant commander science, but that's your special seat. So if you really don't like science, you can just replace this all with pilot abilities and not have to worry about the sciencey stuff in the seat at all. Which in my opinion makes this one the most flexible of all the Striker Wing escorts, at least from a damaging standpoint, because a lot of DPS captains don't like science builds. They're doing energy-based builds. But that's all up to you, frankly. Also keep in mind, this is a ship that didn't get its name changed with the escort carrier update. I don't know why Cryptic didn't change the name on this ship, because it was part of the old tactical carrier paradigm, along with the Fleet Kin and the Fleet Alita and the couple ones available from the exchange as well. But Cryptic decided not to. I sent them a tweet on like the day that this was announced, and they never responded to me. So we'll see if they ever decide to change the name of that starship. In terms of the stuff from the exchange itself for the stats, there's only 3 starships from the exchange. There are these 2, as well as the Zindi Striker Wing escort, which I don't really think is that good, but it looks cool. As for these 2 ships, the Gemini version is part of the old paradigm with 4 weapons in the front, 3 in the back. The Herc one was released around the time of Victory's life, a little bit later than that, but because of that, it's got the more modern 5 weapons in the front and 2 in the back. This one's basically a superior version of the Engle, assuming that you're going to go with straight energy. If you go with more sciencey stuff, the Engle might actually be better depending upon your exact build. I just like this one better because it has pilot and command, but again, this is something from the exchange, so it should be better than something from the fleet. Now, for other escorts, I could have listed a lot of them here, but I decided to put in the ones that I think are the closest. We'll start off with a couple of ones from Gemini Vanguard, because even though these ships don't have a hangar bay, they do have the wingman mechanic, which, to my understanding, does count for the trade because they are NPC allies. And reading upon how the Starship trade works, it seems to work with NPC allies that are around you. So anything that gives you more of those, science fleets, hangar bays, mechanic, all seem to fall into that line, as well as anything that summons more pets too. Like from the Gemini Vanguard carrier's console, which can be put on any starship now. And the Temporal Warship is a sciencey type tactical vessel, so kind of falls in line in here with some stuff here as well, but it's a lot lower on its hull. But still has 4 science consoles and 1 science tactical consoles. The veteran heavy destroyer for Dominion captains also has a command seat, which is why I decided to put it in here as well. Its stats are relatively comparable, but the veteran destroyers are based upon the old paradigm, so the Gemini version had to follow the same train of thought essentially. It also has much lower science consoles, but because we've got the new the Gemini recruit stuff is coming to consoles really soon, so y'all will have access to this ship if you decide to have a Dominion captain. Keep in mind the veteran destroyers are faction specific. If you're a Federation captain, you can't use the Dominion version. You have to use the Federation version. As for some other ships, we have the Federation's Fleet Temporal Escort, which has some more sciencey stuff on it too, but it doesn't have a hangar bay and no other fun stuff. And the New Orleans was another sciencey escort. With more and more of these sciencey escorts coming out, this thing feels more and more lackluster to me, but it does have an intelligence seat, so there is kind of that going for it if you really want that. The last two ones here will be two from the C-Store. I'm not listing the C-Store ones of this ship or the Tier 5 ones because those ones don't have the full stats of what you're going to be wanting for the extreme endgame in this game. When it comes to the C-Store, we don't have any complete endgame statted starships in the Strike-Wing Escort category. We have very few of them in this subclass, so the best we can do for the C-Store, in my opinion, is the Vanguard warship, the standard one that you have to do Tier 6 Mastery to unlock for your account. It's a very solid tactical ship. It's not necessarily the most well-rounded for science, but it's a very solid platform for other builds in the game. And then we have the Romulan Ikabar pilot escort. This is around with the Romulan version of like the Andorian pilot escort, as well as the Lethean pilot escort for the sciencey version, with 4 science and 5 tactical consoles. This is the line of ships, by the way, that gives you the trait improved gravity well. So if you're going to be doing a science-oriented build and you can afford the Zen, you're probably going to be buying this ship anyway. So as you're earning that trait, if you can afford that, you're going to have a general feel with this ship already as to whether or not you might like something like the Engle. Alright, so let's go into the console trait and some more thoughts. These new Strike-Wing escorts, keep in mind we don't have any Strike-Wing escorts in the game with a commander specialization seat. So especially considering we're talking about a fleet starship, it's expected that we're not going to have these ships have a commander specialization seat. And in general, I personally view these as a slightly sturdier but less oriented in terms of DPS of the Prime Engle from last year. They're also available from military tier 3, which is much more accessible than the old Strike-Wing escorts from the fleet, which required tier 5 military, which a lot of people are not going to have access to. Keep in mind though, you do need tier 5 fleet military still to get access to the ultra rare hangar pets of whatever ones you have access to. You need tier 5 military to get those, and that was again back because they basically just put all the carrier stuff at tier 5 because in the olden days of Star Trek Online, Cryptic didn't feel that escorts was carriers in any fashion were supposed to be viable. They're supposed to be more fun than viable, so they didn't want a lot of the players to have access to them. They've been changing their minds more recently, so that restriction might actually change in the future as well. We'll see. As for the console, I think this console is great. I think it's going to be good for EPG, exotic-oriented science builds, but it's especially going to be good for the energy-oriented science builds. So if you're using energy weapons with science abilities, I think this is probably going to be a meta console to put on those types of builds. If you're going to be doing the traditional, more cheaper science torpedo builds, you're probably not going to find as much value in this console, but you might with the trait. So what this console does, it gives you passive energy damage and control expertise. Additionally, the clicky does some pass-through gravimetric energy damage that if it hits at least 5 enemies, it applies a pull and reapplies some of that damage again. So basically, if you're using a gravity well, for instance, and pull in a lot of enemies, and then activate this console, it's going to add even more AoE DOT damage, and it's going to add an additional pull to keep the enemies in that gravity well for the duration. So in terms of all that, I think it's going to be very good. We'll see based upon the stats whether it's good or not, but at least by how it sounds, it should be really good. The experimental weapon, however, just sounds like another electrical experimental weapon that might hit more enemy vessels. Maybe it's good on the DPS side, but at least from the way that it sounds, it honestly doesn't sound very good nor interesting to me personally. Then again, I don't fly escorts normally, so maybe I am missing something with the experimental weapon itself. The trait, what it does, and this was clarified on Reddit was that your command abilities as well as your torpedo abilities cause your next torpedo that you launch from your starship to also cause all NPCs, all of your NPC allies that you have summoned to also fire a torpedo at, or a group of torpedoes at the target as well. Basically what this means, this trait is going to be great for torpedo-oriented builds that have at least one hangar bay. This means the Zenkethi Zentar from Promotion Packs, which is already the best torpedo build platform in the game, is going to be even more of the best torpedo-based platform in the game with this trait. Basically, if you're doing a torpedo build that has at least one hangar bay or has the wingman mechanic for extra NPC allies around you, this trait's going to be good for you. If you're doing a torpedo build on a platform without any hangar bays whatsoever, or allies, you're not going to find value in this trait. But basically, with these ships, what it comes down to is if you're going to be doing science types of builds or torpedo types of builds, you're probably going to find some sort of value from these starships, from the C-Store. If you do straight energy and nothing else, you're probably not going to find value in either of the other things available from these starships. Okay, so for the TLDW for this video, we have some new Strike Wing escorts available from the fleet as well as from the C-Store. When it comes to the fleet stuff, these are from Tier 3 military. The other Strike Wing escorts available from the fleet previously were Tier 5, so these are more accessible Strike Wing escorts. These new ones have a Lieutenant Commander command seat. The previous ones had Lieutenant Commander pilot, and most of the ones from the exchange also have at least a Lieutenant Commander pilot in there as well. The Starship trait is going to be a pretty decent Starship trait if you are doing a torpedo oriented build and have at least one hangar bay or the wingman mechanic on your Starship. Otherwise, you're probably not going to find value in it. The console, I think, is going to be meta for the science energy builds. It should still be okay for science torpedo, but it's going to be science energy that the console is going to be really good for. Gives you passive energy damage, nice control, expertise, and an active which synergizes really well with gravity well. The experimental weapon doesn't sound very good. Feel free to read the post if you really want to get stuff as to what's going on there. Again, it's from Fleet Military Tier 3 instead of Tier 5. But also keep in mind the ultra rare hangar pets, which are the best types of hangar pets in the game at the moment, require Tier 5 military to acquire. So there is that for you. For the rest of 2019, going into 2020, here are my general plans for the rest of the year. Later on this week, I'm going to be doing my ground DPS builds video. That was delayed a week because last week's video took me 2 weeks to do, because I wasted a week trying to find a console vendor in the game that wasn't from the fleet or the exchange or from reputations. And then the other 2 weeks of this month will be going over some stuff with the SGO economy. The one next week will be going over loot boxes and gambling. And then the week after that will be a lighter video going over some stuff with the lithium farming, because a couple of you have seemed to be asking about that, so I'll do a video on it. In December, my first week will be another lighter video as well, going over some theoretical builds, a couple for PvP, as well as a couple of carrier-oriented builds in which your hangar pads are doing, at least a third to half of your damage. The rest of December and into January, we'll be going over SGO lore and the SGO timeline. This will be according to me, with a general overview, and then a breakdown in terms of what the 3 main captains, one for each of the main factions, Federation, Klingon, and Romulan Republic, were actually doing, which ones they actually didn't do because the timeline's really tight. As it is, which it used to be 18 months to stuff in the Dyson Sphere arc, and they changed it to actually be just 1 year. Why? Anyway, there's gonna be a lot of things with that. There's gonna be a lot of math involved in that too. So those are gonna be really long videos, which is why I'm gonna need 2 lighter videos to give me the time necessary to be able to dive into this pretty heavily. In January, we'll be talking about how Star Trek Picard is going to be impacting Star Trek Online, and what Star Trek Online will have to do from what I already know, as well as some things I'm probably going to be assuming that Star Trek Online is going to have to change. And then I'll start diving into a lot more of the lore of the more finer detail things, maybe with the Dominion, if you want me to go into that, or any specific characters as well for deeper dives. I definitely want to dive into Stas a lot more, which y'all will have a bigger appreciation for after I go over the S2 timeline, because he's heavily involved in a lot of it. So anyway, that's basically it for my plans for the rest of this year and beginning of next year, and the stuff about the new Prime Engle and its equivalent Klingon version. Feel free to like it and subscribe if that type of stuff for the previous slide was interesting to you all. And also hit the bell icon. I generally only put out about a video a week unless there's also a new starship that's announced with stats. Then there'll be a second video as well. And so yeah, that's basically it for this video. Yeah, hopefully that you all enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll hopefully see you later on this week.